My name is Natalie. When my father suffered a paralysis attack, I went to ask my uncle for help. Uncle had just returned from a pilgrimage and was building a new house, but when he saw me, he made a face and said, "Sweetheart, we don't even have enough flour to eat. How can I pay for your father's treatment?" I came back home crying. My father passed away because we couldn't afford treatment. I begged God for justice. When my uncle's new house was ready, he invited everyone. I went too, but the moment I stepped inside, my heart sank. I was born years after my parents' marriage. My father was the eldest among his siblings, his younger brother, my uncle, and their youngest sister, my aunt. All family responsibilities fell on my father. Uncle never worked and behaved like a tyrant at home. If he got angry, my father would silently stand there. No one ever asked why the man working day and night remained so quiet. Uncle ordered my father around, buy clothes for the kids, pay their school fees, and he never refused. Aunt would come crying with her children, saying her husband hit her and they hadn't eaten for days. My father, full of compassion, would give her whatever he had. I saw it all but said nothing. My father sacrificed everything for his siblings without complaint. He didn't even wear new clothes himself but always bought shoes and clothes for uncle's kids. If there was only one meal at home, he'd lie and say he had already eaten. He built everything, land, shops, money, but gave it all away to his siblings. When I asked why, he said, "This is all God's blessing. How can I keep it just for myself?" Uncle proudly told everyone that the entire business belonged to the family, not just my father. But my father stayed silent. That silence became his duty. One neighbor once told my mom, "Your husband is a good man, but his kindness will leave him empty-handed." Mom just lowered her eyes and said, "What can I do? He has a big heart." That's when I realized sometimes a big heart breaks a person. My mother started showing strange behavior, silent all day, staring at the ceiling at night. My father never questioned her or complained. One day, my mom shouted at him, asking why he never stood up to anyone. He simply replied, "They're my own. How can I hurt them?" I began to truly understand my father's sacrifices. One morning, a water pipe burst and Uncle, sitting nearby, said sarcastically, "Didn't I tell your father to fix it?" I replied, "If you had given us anything, we could have done it ourselves." He laughed and said, "You've got quite the mouth now, just like your father." But at least he stayed quiet. I stayed silent because I didn't have the right to speak. My mom started behaving more strangely, forgetting things, talking to herself. On Uncle's son's birthday, there was a big party, but we weren't invited, even though we lived in the same house. Late at night, Mom said, "We are strangers in our own home." I held her hand and said, "One day, this will all end." The next day, Aunt insulted Mom for not washing dishes properly, saying it looked like a blind person did it. My mom just lowered her head. My father heard it all but, as always, said nothing. That silence was a storm slowly tearing us apart. Mom's condition worsened, and the home felt more broken every day. One morning, Uncle announced in front of everyone, "I can't live in this house anymore. It's too noisy, and your mom's behavior is unbearable." Now my father heard their words and simply said, "All right, you can separate, I'll arrange something." Aunt Linda immediately jumped in, saying, "Just don't send us to some old neighborhood. We want a house of the same standard as this one." Uncle David insisted, "Yes, of course, brother. What fault is it of my kids? They've grown up in this house too. They deserve a good home as well." My father just nodded, as if he knew refusal was no longer an option. For days, after work at the store, he stayed out late, sometimes talking to a builder, sometimes showing blueprints to laborers. After months of effort, a small but clean and proper house was built by my father for Uncle David. The day came when his family happily packed and moved out. I thought maybe peace would come now, but the silence that settled in the house grew even heavier. One day, Mom told me, "Your father's blood pressure has been high for days." I ask him to take his medicine, but he just refuses. "You talk to him." I went to Dad and said, "Dad, you need medicine. Let me take you to the doctor." He smiled and said, "Sweetheart, your Uncle David doesn't think I'm being fair. Let it go. God will make things right." I was shocked that his brother mattered more to him than his own health. That day, I felt something new for my father. It wasn't love or pity, it was a kind of grief I couldn't express. That same week, a man who handled land paperwork came home. I saw papers spread out and Dad writing something. In the evening, Mom asked what it was, and Dad said, "Just dividing things, giving everyone their share." Mom was surprised, "You made all this through your hard work. Nothing was left by your father, so what are you dividing?" Dad looked away and said, "They're my own. If I don't give them, who else will?" Days later, Uncle David came and said, "Brother, that old land that's not officially in anyone's name, give us a share too. It'll help with the kids' education." Dad immediately took out the papers, signed them, and handed them over, as if he was just signing, not giving away pieces of himself. One evening, I saw Dad walking slower, struggling up the stairs. I asked if he was okay. He said, "Yes, just a little tired." That night, Mom told me Dad's blood pressure had spiked again, but he still refused medicine. I spent the night on the roof, staring at the sky, wondering if silence is also some kind of transaction, if one can see everything and still not ask for anything in return. The next day, Uncle David came again and said, "Brother, that warehouse space, give us that too, we want to start a business." Dad listened and quietly said, "Come tomorrow, I'll have the papers ready." I couldn't take it anymore and said, "Dad, please stop. What more is left to give?" He looked at me and said, "I don't want to win, sweetheart. I just want to save relationships." But I had learned that relationships don't survive by only giving. Sometimes you have to hold back too. The house had lost its old warmth. Mom would often sit by the window and doze off staring at the street. The property my father built with years of effort was now reduced to files, and the relationships, which seemed whole from the outside, were empty inside. Everything was gone, yet the troubles weren't ending. A calm like before a storm had taken over. Though Uncle David lived in his new home, he came over almost daily, sometimes for water, sometimes to ask Mom about old times, and sometimes just to keep an eye on Dad. One morning, after I gave Mom her medicine and was sweeping the yard, Aunt Sarah showed up. I opened the door and she walked in without permission, her older daughter behind her. She asked, "Where's brother?" I pointed inside, saying he's resting. She went straight to his bed and said, "We need to talk. You can't hide anything from us anymore. We know you still have 2 plots of land left that you haven't told anyone about." Dad turned and softly said, "That land is for my daughter." Aunt Sarah got angry and said, "What do you mean? Aren't we your real siblings? Haven't we shared life with you? You always gave us something, give us now too. It's our right." Her voice grew louder. I came to the door and said, "Aunt Sarah, Dad isn't well. Please talk about this later." She glared at me and said, "Now this girl will lecture us? Who do you people think you are?" The argument hadn't even ended when Uncle David also arrived, probably called by Aunt Sarah. He came in and said, "Brother, let's be clear. We want an equal share of whatever land is left." This time, Dad closed his eyes. His face had turned pale, but Uncle didn't stop. "You've given us everything all your life. Why stop now? Now that your daughter's grown, suddenly you care about inheritance?" I held myself back. Uncle didn't even look at me and said, "Now these girls will speak in our matters?" "Brother, you decide now, right now." Dad softly said, "I've named that land for my daughter. She deserves something too." Aunt Sarah laughed and said, "And what good is that? She'll get married and leave one day." Uncle David insisted, "We're coming tomorrow with the documents. Be ready." They both left, and the room fell into a heavy silence. Dad's breathing grew heavy, sweat gathered on his forehead. Mom rushed in with medicine, but Dad lifted his hand to refuse. I offered water and adjusted his pillow, but he was no longer his usual self, unable to speak. By evening, he was slightly better, but his face looked faded. He called me close and whispered, "Never let anyone know that even the men of a house can cry." I held his hand, a stone-like weight settling inside me. The next day, Uncle David did return the papers in hand, along with a lawyer. He said, "Brother, just sign these so there won't be any problems later." Dad looked at the papers and quietly said, "Give me a few more days to think." Uncle John stood up angrily and said, "We never thought you'd refuse us. You're the same one who always agreed with everything we said. Now you've changed." Aunt Lisa added from behind, "Why wouldn't he change? His daughter is grown up now. You have to give her dowry too, gold and land." Dad was about to say something, but I had had enough. I said, "Aunt Lisa, my dad has given you all everything his whole life. If he wants to keep something for himself or for me, why does that bother you?" She snapped, "You've got quite a tongue now. That's why we say girls shouldn't be given too much freedom." Uncle John said one last time, "We're giving you some time, but not too much." After that day, Dad's condition worsened. He spent more time in bed, had no appetite, refused medicine, and just stared silently out the window. Mom kept saying it was the effect of that day's argument. I watched his health go up and down and realized he wasn't just physically ill, he was breaking inside. One morning, as I was making breakfast and Dad was sitting in the yard, I gave him his tea and went back in. Moments later, there was a loud thud. I ran out and saw him collapsed on the ground, his body limp, one arm lifeless, and his face twisted. I screamed for help. Mom rushed in. Dad was trying to speak, but his words wouldn't come out. I called the neighbor, Mr. Anderson, who checked his pulse and said, "Get him to a hospital immediately. Looks like a stroke." We rushed him to the hospital in a rickshaw. He kept looking at us all the way, unable to speak, eyes full of helplessness. The doctor confirmed he had a stroke that affected one side of his brain, he couldn't speak or move. Treatment had to start immediately. Mom cried and begged the doctor to do everything possible. Dad was admitted, and I called Uncle John and Aunt Lisa. They said, "We'll see. Maybe we'll come." But 3 days passed, and no one showed up. Each day in the hospital brought new challenges, running out of meds, selling off little things, but I never let Dad miss his medication. His one side was paralyzed. One day, Dad motioned to me and pointed to the door like he was waiting for someone. I whispered, "Dad, no one has come yet." Tears welled up in his eyes as if something inside him broke. I held his hand and said, "I'm here, Dad. Please get well soon." After 3 days, the doctor allowed us to bring him home but said treatment must continue. At home, everything looked the same, but Dad was no longer the same man. We set up a separate room for him with all his essentials neatly arranged. I made his care my full-time duty. One day I asked, "Is there something you want to say?" He nodded. I brought a notebook and pen, and he slowly wrote 2 words, "I'm sorry." Tears fell from my eyes. "What are you sorry for, Dad? You've never taken anything from anyone." He closed his eyes. Around that time, Uncle John's son's wedding was being planned. The neighborhood was lit up and festive. Our house stayed quiet. Mom once pointed out, "Look, they're putting lights on our backyard wall." But no one's asked how your father is. I stayed silent. Some things are only understood in silence. Our lives now revolved around Dad, his medicine, his care, his diet, and his memory, all without income. One day I went to buy medicine and stopped in front of Dad's old shop, the one he had built with his own hands. It now had a new lock and a board that read Varma Industries. I peeked inside and saw workers unloading goods. I asked one of them, and he said, "This belongs to Mr. Sunil Varma. It's been 2 weeks since they started using it as a warehouse." My heart sank. Sunil Varma, Uncle John. I rushed home and told Mom. She went silent, then said, "I heard him talking about a new business recently." I said, "But that shop belonged to Dad." She replied, "Not anymore." That evening, I went to Uncle John's house. Aunt Lisa opened the door. I walked in. Uncle was in his study. I said, "Uncle John, I need to talk." He looked up and said, "Go ahead, what's wrong?" I said, "That shop, it was Dad's. Now it's a warehouse." Uncle said, "So now you're keeping track of accounts?" I replied, "That shop was our livelihood. It was Dad's property." He stood up, turned away, and laughed. "Look, Nivedita, you're a girl. Girls don't get involved in these matters. You take care of your father's treatment. We'll handle our business." I said, "All I want is what's rightfully ours." He said, "Your dad gave me that shop willingly. It was his choice." "You know what the duty of an elder brother is," I said. "Then I need some proof, some paper, something concrete." He replied, "You're asking me for proof? You're a girl, and girls like you are only good for questions, not decisions." I said, "Times have changed. I may be a girl, but I'm not weak." Uncle Mark laughed and said, "We'll see about that. Go take care of your father. The business world is not for people like you." I quietly walked back. I had made up my mind to take legal help. When I told Mom, she got scared. She said, "Daughter, making enemies isn't easy." I replied, "This isn't enmity, this is our right. If we stay silent now, we'll lose everything." I went to a local lawyer, Mr. Stevens, and explained everything, showing him the documents. He studied them and said, "If you have genuine papers, you can make a legal claim." I had pulled out many files from my father's old records, but some papers were missing. Mr. Stevens suspected they were removed on purpose but said he could investigate. That night, I sat beside Dad. He was staring at the ceiling, his eyes weary, his face silent. I held his hand and told him, "Dad, I want to get back what's ours, the land and the shop you dreamt of." His eyes lit up as if a spark had returned. Every day I cared for him while poverty kept growing. Medicines were costly, and savings were nearly gone. One day, Mom held my hand and said, "I think I'll start cleaning houses in the neighborhood. Just 2 hours in the morning." I held her hand and said, "You won't do that, Mom. I'll find a way." But she said, "You take care of your father. I'll handle the outside." The next morning, she left. Dad signaled toward the door, and I knew he felt guilty about Mom working. I held his hand and assured him everything would be okay. Women in the neighborhood judged us, some with pity, some with malice. But Mom quietly endured it all, washing utensils and returning with a few dollars in hand. "Look, daughter, I earned $2 more today," she'd say, her face a mix of fatigue and pride. That day, I decided to start sewing again using an old machine Mom got in her dowry. I cleaned it, oiled it, and began with old fabric. That very day, Mrs. Linda, from the neighborhood, gave me her daughter's clothes to stitch. Slowly, work started coming in. I'd sew by day and care for Dad in the evening. Mom worked till noon, then cooked and helped me with sewing. Our home became a little workshop. One day, Mom told me Mrs. Nisha mentioned a fabric store owner who might give us more work. She visited, but returned disappointed. They said, "Since you're alone and already managing the house, how will you deliver on time?" she said. I told her, "We'll grow step by step." Dad would gesture toward the window or his leg, and I'd comfort him saying he'd soon walk again. At night, he'd hold my hand and try to speak, but words wouldn't come. I'd say, "You're the one who made me strong." Slowly, things started getting a bit better, though gossip about us spread: sick father, maid mother, daughter who sews. One day, I heard two women saying we'd lost everything. I stayed silent. I had no time for answers. I opened the old cupboard and checked property documents under Dad's name. Some were missing. Mr. Stevens said we needed legal standing first. A new path opened, but it was dark. My days and nights merged is sewing, paperwork, caregiving, cleaning. One morning, as Mom prepared breakfast and I finished the last stitch, Dad seemed restless. I sat beside him. He was sweating, his fingers cold, breathing heavy. I called out for Mom. She touched his forehead, pulled out old prescriptions and medicines. I phoned the clinic, but it was closed. It was Sunday. Dad's body trembled. I tried giving water. He couldn't swallow. I told Mom we needed to go to the hospital. This wasn't normal. She began crying silently and said, "Daughter, but where will the money come from?" There was only a $500 note in my purse. I opened Mom's purse and found another $500 left from the tailoring work. It was enough to get to the city, maybe even an ambulance, but not for Dad's treatment at the hospital. I thought for a moment and went to Uncle Michael's house. Aunt Sarah opened the door with a cup of tea in her hand, her face still sleepy. When she saw me, she frowned and said, "Yes, what is it?" I told her I needed to meet Uncle Michael urgently. Dad was very unwell. She called out, "Michael, your niece is here. Says your brother's sick." Uncle Michael came out dressed as if he was heading to a meeting. I told him Dad had suffered another paralysis attack and we didn't even have money for transport. He sighed and said, "Look, Emily, I really don't have time. I've got an important meeting. I can't drop everything anymore." I pleaded for his car or at least some money. He sat down and said, "I'm not responsible for your father." His words hit me like a brick. I reminded him of the shop, the land, the warehouse, all taken from Dad. I begged him to help his own brother, who had done so much for him. He looked away and repeated that he had no time, told me to ask someone else. I turned and walked away silently, tears falling. But I didn't stop. I went to a kind neighbor, Mr. Thompson, who helped take Dad to a small government hospital. The doctor admitted him immediately, it was a more severe stroke. Mom sat on the floor crying. Dad stayed unconscious for hours. When he finally opened his eyes, he didn't recognize me. I held his hand and told him I was Emily, his daughter. He opened his eyes as if waking from a fog but couldn't speak. That night, I sat in a corner and looked at the property documents. Time was slipping away, and Dad didn't have the strength he once did. He just stared at the walls. I told Mom we had to act fast. Dad didn't have long. She said we could only pray, but I knew prayers weren't enough without medicine, and we had no money. That night in the hospital felt endless. I prayed someone, anyone, could save him. 2 days passed. Dad never fully regained consciousness. His breathing became irregular. Then, one night, he opened his eyes briefly, looked at me with sunken, dark-circled eyes, and tried to speak. I gave him a pen. Holding his hand, he shakily wrote, "Forgive me." I closed my eyes and said, "Dad, you did no wrong. You fulfilled your duty." By morning, his breathing slowed. Mom stroked his head, reassuring him he'd recover. But the monitor's beep faded. A nurse rushed in, then a doctor. Time stood still. Mom screamed. I held her tight. Dad had lost the silent war he had fought for years, without ever complaining. Back home, relatives gathered. Some prepared for the funeral, others offered hollow condolences. I called Uncle Michael, Aunt Lisa, no one answered. No one came to save Dad. Uncle Michael and Aunt Lisa showed up at the funeral with expressions of fake grief. Lisa even cried, but I saw through the act. That night, Uncle Michael came over with his son. Sitting in the courtyard, he said, "Just came to express sorrow. Your father meant everything to us." Mom looked down. I stayed silent. Then he added, "I was thinking, this house might be too big for you now. If you want, we can divide it in half." I was furious. I quietly replied, "Dad's pyre hasn't even cooled, and you're here talking about property." Uncle Michael laughed and said I misunderstood. I pointed to the door and said, "Please leave. We can take care of ourselves." He left in silence, his son trailing behind. The next day, Aunt Lisa came, hugged Mom, and cried. "Your brother left us alone," she sobbed. Mom didn't reply. Then Lisa suggested, "About that land in the city, if you want, we can all split it, so there's no dispute." Mom looked up at me. I replied, "You've come just to talk about the land?" "And the land you're referring to was in my father's name. We have the documents. If you have doubts, you can go to court. But you won't get anything from here now." Aunt Lisa fell silent. She sat quietly for a while, then left. My father's memories began to echo through the walls of our home, his clothes, his medicines from his final days, everything remained as it was. But he wasn't there anymore. Something inside me had made a firm decision that I wouldn't let anyone take anything from us again. The land, the store, the house, everything now belonged solely to us. My father's last breath had given me the strength for a new battle. Life after his death took a sharp turn. His shadows lingered on the courtyard walls, and his silent presence could be felt on every surface of the house. Mom became quieter, and I tried to stay busy during the day so that the nights would pass more easily. Days went by like a routine. Uncle Robert and Aunt Lisa were nowhere to be found. One night, after Mom had fallen asleep, I sat on the terrace finishing some stitching work under the mobile flashlight. The sky was clear, stars shone brightly, but I had a deep unrest within me that wouldn't let me sleep. I returned to the room and found my father's old handkerchief under the pillow, the one where he had once embroidered my name. I hugged it to my chest and fell asleep. In a dream, my father appeared before me with the same gentle expression I knew so well. He looked at me and softly said, "Daughter, God always ensures justice. You've endured so much, and He will balance it. Just be patient. The time is near." I stepped closer and asked, "Dad, why did you leave? We had so much left to fight for." He smiled faintly and said, "Everything happens at its time, and when justice arrives, truth reveals itself. Just don't let your heart grow hard." I woke up with a start, sweating, heart pounding, and the room blanketed in silence. Before sunrise, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find Ricky, the neighborhood boy, pale and anxious. He said, "Nivedita, did you hear? Uncle Robert's warehouse caught fire that night. Everything burned. He lost goods worth lakhs. Not just that, the fire reached his home too. 2 of his younger sons got caught in the fire." I asked, "His sons burned?" He nodded, "Yes. His wife is unconscious. Robert is in shock. No one knows what's happening to their family." Then he left. I went inside and told Mom. She sat in silence for a long time. Then she said, "We should go too." I looked at her and said, "Not now, Mom. They are still questions to us, not answers." By afternoon, the entire neighborhood buzzed with news of Robert's warehouse burning down, his ruined business, and the tragic death of his 2 young sons. People whispered that this was divine justice for the injustice he did. That evening Aunt Lisa came to our house, teary-eyed, asking to speak. I opened the door. She sat on the floor, looking at Mom, and said, "Child, what happened is our consequence. We hurt your father. We left you both alone and lost everything in our greed. Now we have no home, no sons. They've left with their wives. I have no one. Please forgive me. I wronged you, and we're being punished. Robert wants to apologize too. He's not conscious yet, but all this has broken us." I looked at Mom, who was silent, and said, "Dad came in my dream and said justice will happen. Just don't harden your heart." Lisa tried to touch my feet in apology, but I stopped her. "No, Aunt Lisa, don't. We wanted to keep the relationships. You saw them as business. Now it's too late." She stood up and said, "One day, Robert will come to apologize too. When he does, have the strength to forgive him." I closed the door. Mom softly said, "This is fate turning. Your father's soul must be at peace now." I replied, "Mom, for the first time, I feel the calm of justice instead of the fire of revenge." The next morning, another knock came. I opened the door to find Uncle Robert and his older son standing there. Their eyes were swollen, beards grown, clothes dirty, heads lowered. The pride that once lived in their eyes was gone. They asked, "Can we come in? We need to talk." Mom opened the door. They sat in the courtyard, their faces full of sorrow and tears in their eyes. Robert said, "We came to apologize. No property talks today. What we did, if someone had done the same to us, we wouldn't have survived. We weren't there in your father's illness. We became his enemies in life and stayed hardened even after death. But God has punished us. It's a pain that can never be forgiven." His son looked up for the first time and said, "My brothers burned in front of us. We couldn't do anything. That's our punishment." Mom began to cry, silently. Robert pulled out some papers and said, "These are the property and shop documents. Everything I took from my brother, I'm giving it back. This is your right. We won't claim anything. I took the papers and checked them one by one. Everything was real. The same land, the same shops they had seized for years. Robert folded his hands and said, Nivedita, forgive us. Maybe your father's soul will finally find peace. And if you forgive us from your heart, maybe we'll find redemption too. God has already punished us. Now, we only seek your forgiveness. They cried and begged for forgiveness. My mom said, Robert, you are my husband's brother. He always considered you his own. Even today, I hold no hatred for you. But the decision now lies with my daughter, she is our only support. Uncle Robert looked at me and said, Daughter, I know there's anger in your heart, and there should be. But I am bowing before you. If you don't forgive us, we won't be able to live with our heads held high. In that moment, I saw my father's face from my dream, reminding me not to harden my heart. I placed the documents aside and softly said, Uncle, if you had done all this at the right time, maybe my father's final moments would have been easier. I've seen him suffer. I'll never forget the moment you shut the door on us. Robert covered his eyes with his hands and said, I know I'm responsible for my brother's death. I took a deep breath and said, I can't forgive you. Not yet. But if my father's soul truly wants me to forgive you, maybe someday I will. For now, I'll just take these papers and accept that this is rightfully mine. Uncle Robert sat with his head bowed. Then he slowly got up and said, Daughter, I will keep praying that one day you forgive me. They both left. That evening felt like the start of a new life. My hands were no longer empty or weak, I was the sole heir to my father's entire property. No one could take that right from us now. Uncle Robert kept coming back, asking for forgiveness. One day, I finally forgave him, and with that, a weight lifted off my heart. He used to say, I may be alive, but I have no peace. If you forgive me, maybe peace will come. Mom said, Forgive him, daughter. Your father never hated anyone. Don't become someone he wouldn't recognize. I listened to my mother and forgave Uncle Robert and Aunt Lisa too. Today, I stand strong on my own feet, the only support my mother has. There are no more troubles in our lives. But every day, every moment, I still remember my father. Friends, I hope you liked our story. If you did, please like the video. If you're new to the channel, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you get the next update first.